Welcome to all, certainly to our esteemed Global Council and board members, but all other important guests that are gathered here for the virtual tour of Hansken, an exhibition prepared by the Rembrandt House. I first want to thank the Rembrandt House for this partnership and a unique opportunity to engage with this exhibition. The exhibition started this week, so we are really in the beginning of it all, and we get a private tour, a virtual one, but we are getting used to that. I want to thank already the speakers of tonight, Leonore van Sloten of the Rembrandt House, the curator of the Rembrandt of the exhibition, and Rikkert Reijnen, our own conservation specialist, who will highlight some of the conservation issues around Hansken. I'm not the expert, so I will not take too much time. I will be your moderator for tonight. So a few housekeeping items. Please, at any time, use the chat box to put your questions there. Later on, there will be time to ask questions. I want to say live, but virtual live then. The conversation will be in English. It will be about an hour. We will start with the virtual tour introduced by Leonore, as said, the curator of this exhibition. And after that, she will give some more insights about what you saw in the virtual tour. And Rikkert will take over and discuss a few of the animal welfare issues that Hansken suffered at that time and how that relates to today. This will be roughly 30 minutes. And after that, we will have 30 minutes of question and answers, where there you can ask, still use the chat, but ask your questions by raising your hand, the virtual one or the real one. The session is being recorded, so it can be shared post-event. Hope we are all in agreement for this. And I will assume that if you're silent, you agree with it. I know most of you, if not all, will know what we do, what our work and mission is, but I still want to tell it in a very short way to refresh our minds and to focus on the exhibition later on. So the International Fund for Animal Welfare is a global animal and species protection organization. We have been committed since 1969 to the rescue of individual animals, the protection of the population and entire species. At the same time, we work on the preservation of the habitats. We work closely with governments, authorities, and multilateral organizations. The implementation of our projects, especially in Eastern and Southern Africa and as well in Asia, involve the local population, and communities always have a high priority. So I will not take too much time, like I said, because Hansken is the topic of today. It fits very well, and as such, we are very pleased to present you tonight our collaboration with Rembrandt House and the exhibition of Hansken. And I want to give the word to Leonore, the curator of Hansken exhibition. So Leonore, please take the floor.
I will. Thank you so much, Joep, for your kind introduction and for the invitation to be part of this webinar. And of course, a big thank you to IFAW for the wonderful collaboration we had for this exhibition. You have taught us so much, and you have added such an incredibly valuable layer to the storyline, which enriches the experience very much and gives it the urgency it deserves. As curator of the museum and this exhibition, I'm proud to share some details on our institution also, because I think it's nice to introduce the museum also a little bit, and the exhibition, of course. So let's start first with the museum. And here it is at Jodenbreestraat in Amsterdam. And the old building you see in the center is the house which Rembrandt inhabited for almost 20 years. And when he bought the house in 1639, he was at the height of his career, and in the same year he was commissioned to paint the Night Watch. But this is not the occasion to dive into his oeuvre very deep, but I need to mention this, Rembrandt was not only active as a painter, he was just as much an etcher. His graphic art is less well known, but just as important as his paintings. And the Rembrandt House owns an important and large collection of etchings by the master, and it is one of our main missions to focus on Rembrandt's role as a graphic artist. He was a true innovator of the etching technique, and he has inspired so many artists during and after his lifetime to pick up the etching needle. Um, and that is an important topic to bring under the attention of the museum audience. But furthermore, of course, we are the house, the museum in which you can visit the artist house. In the same year in which he bought the house, he etched this impressive self-portrait you see on the left, upper left, showing himself to the world as a successful entrepreneur and gentleman. But the next years brought him successes as well as deep tragedies. His wife died during the months in which he finished his work on night watch. And after having lived in the house for almost 20 years, due to financial problems, he had to sell his possessions and his house. And he moved to a simple rental house on the other side of the city, where he died in 1669, 63 years old. On the right, we see an important document. Rembrandt's possessions were catalogued when he went bankrupt, and this inventory still exists. And this is an incredible source at hand of which we know how the house was decorated and how rooms were used. The history of the house as a museum started more than a century ago. To be more precise, tomorrow it will be 110 years ago that our Queen Wilhelmina opened the museum to the public. So after the disastrous COVID year, which has hit the museum extremely hard since we are very dependent on income from ticket sales and most of our visitors come from abroad, we now also have some happy news to share, apart from the exhibition, of course. But let's go back to the first years of the museum. The museum looked very different, as you can see here. The museum was used as a print room in which the etching collection was on a permanent show. And here we see what the effect was. This room was Rembrandt's painting studio. And only in the 1990s, next slide, please, the museum could expand with a modern wing next door. And then the desire to bring the house back to the 17th century interior was finally possible. And this is how the painting studio looks like now. And even though it is a reconstruction, it gives so much more insight into the life and the daily working practice of the artist. And I have some more examples of rooms in the house, like this one, the voorhuis, the entrance hall, or the zaal, the private living house, the bedroom, and of course, Rembrandt's art room. And this room is very important in relation to the exhibition and the story of Hansken. Rembrandt was a vast collector of art, rarities, and exotic objects. He never traveled, but through the goods which were brought into the harbor of Amsterdam, he could discover the world. He had a large room in his house designated as a private mini museum. And he was not the only one who collected in this way. The collection of a Danish professor, Ole Worm, was quite comparable to that of Rembrandt. Ole Worm, by the way, also had the chance to see Hansken, and he was very enthusiastic about the animal, he writes in a letter. So then we jump to the incredible story of Hansken, and here you see the man behind our current knowledge on the elephant, Michiel Roska-Abing. He has researched Hansken traces during the past 15 years, which has resulted, amongst others, in this English book you see on the left-hand side, which you, by the way, could order via our museum webshop, by which you would support our museum in these difficult times. And Hansken also has her own website. Yeah, www.elephanthansken.com, where you can find all the documentation on Michiel's research. It shows an astonishing amount of information on this living creature, and her story is both incredible and heartbreaking, and it's about time that it's shared with a large audience. The exhibition has been in the making for already some years. First, we planned it to show it in 2018, but some important loans were not available then. And due to COVID, we had to postpone the project from summer 2020 to this summer. But here we finally are. The exhibition is ready and the museum has reopened since to the public on June 5th. And the lenders are very generous in expanding the period of loan, so we can show the exhibition for the full 3 months until the end of August. Here is mentioned end of July, but we can keep it 1 month longer. In our exhibition, we focus on the following themes. Of course, the context of the Dutch East India Company traveling the world, drawing after life, which was important for artists to see animals and observe them and draw them after life. Whereabouts of Hansken in Europe, her traces, the advertisements on the elephant, Hansken and her role in science, and of course, animal welfare. Now, the elephant was born in 1630 on Ceylon, Sri Lanka. As a baby elephant, she was brutally taken from her herd and brought to Amsterdam, probably on commission of stadholder Frederick Henry, who owned more live exotic animals. And here we see the way the ship went from Batavia to Amsterdam, and they stayed on sea for 7 months, which must have been a traumatizing experience for the young elephant. Now, in the summer of 1633, the elephant arrived in Amsterdam, only 3 years old, together with 3 other animals, a leopard, a cassowary, and an Asian deer. And these animals were shown in a large building in Amsterdam for a few months, but there the leopard killed the cassowary, and unfortunately Hansken sat down on the deer. So the only 2 remaining animals, Hansken and the leopard, were brought to the palace of Frederick Henry in Rijswijk. And after some years, Frederick Henry sold Hansken. A former military man, Cornelis van Groeneveld, bought her for 20,000 guilders. And he taught her some 36 tricks and traveled with Hansken through Europe for some 20 years. They went by foot from city to city, from fair to fair, and Cornelis earned large amounts of money with their performances. And we would like to show you now a short video, which was recorded in the museum, so you can see a little bit more of the exhibition, the layout of the exhibition, and I will dive into the works of art by Rembrandt more deeply. Welcome in Amsterdam. Here we are standing in Rembrandt's former living house, now part of the Rembrandt House Museum. This drawing was made by Rembrandt in 1637. It is the first image we have of Hansken. He probably saw her at the Fall Fair in Amsterdam and made this drawing. He captured her movements and how she was still a young animal. She was 7 years at that time. And with the black chalk, he was able to suggest her grayish skin, but also the tiny hairs on her head and on the tip of her tail. A wonderful example of how Rembrandt used his observations in his artworks is this etching. This etching was probably made not long after he had seen her in 1637. And here we can see Adam and Eve in paradise. And normally artists used to portray Adam and Eve like classic beauties in a wonderful landscape filled with a variety of animals. And here Rembrandt chooses differently. He shows Adam and Eve as normal people, but also he adds only 2 animals. A mythological animal, a dragon, and far away in the distance we see a tiny elephant. The elephant was a symbol of chastity, and Adam and Eve at this point are not yet aware of their nudity and their sexual desires, because Eve has not yet eaten from the apple, but the dragon is seducing her to do so, after which everything will change. Hansken and van Groeneveld returned to Amsterdam on a number of occasions in different years, and this drawing was probably made a few years later than the first one we saw, since we see an elephant which is rather older than in the first drawing. Here we see Hansken seen from 3 different viewpoints, and Rembrandt made a certain collage of these observations and brought those together as if Hansken was in a herd. Probably he knew that elephants were animals that live in herds. And here perhaps we see her owner, Cornelis van Groeneveld. Van Groeneveld arranged his merchandise in a commercial way.
He had this engraving made, and the copper plate traveled with them from city to city, and there, where they stayed for a while, he could have it printed. And those prints were sold after the performances. And in this copper engraving, we see a few of Hansken's tricks. We see how she holds a flag, how she holds a sword and fights with Van Groeneveld, how she bows or holds people on her trunk. The elephant in itself must have been impressive to all these people who had never seen such a creature live. But the fact that she was trained to do tricks made her even more interesting. This was related to the idea, which had been put out in the world by Pliny the Elder, that elephants had a human intelligence. So the fact that she was able to do all kinds of things and react on certain situations was an interesting fact. Since Hansken was a huge investment, Van Groeneveld probably tried to take care of her the best he could. But unfortunately, the visual sources we have, the images of Hansken, show us otherwise. For example, this impressive etching by Herman Saftleven, who saw Hansken in 1646 in the neighborhood of Utrecht, tells us that she was not in a good state, and she was only 16 years old by this time. Saftleven saw her, drew her, etched her from 2 different angles in a fantasy landscape, but we see that her belly is extremely swollen and her nails have grown much too long. Hansken's inferior condition must have been the result of the lack of knowledge people had on how to take care of such creatures. For example, they had no idea what the diet of an elephant should look like. In autumn 1655, they visited Florence, but there she suddenly collapsed. She had been, according to a witness, for an hour in tremendous pain, after which she fell to the ground with great noise, and in one sigh she exhaled her last breath, and she died. An artist who was living in Florence at that time, Stefano della Bella, saw the dead animal and drew her. He made these incredible emotional and moving recordings of this incredible event. And we can see how the dead animal is lying on the floor, surrounded by people doing research and looking for probably the reason why she died. It was said that she was poisoned, but after they finished the research, it was clear that she had died from a very high fever related to an infection in one of her paws.
Yeah, so coming back to the story of Pliny the Elder and the myths which existed on elephants, Van Groeneveld used this to make Hansken a true must-see. He had invested 20,000 guilders in her, so he had to think of a business model. So by teaching her tricks, he enlarged his success. And here we see how the fair in Amsterdam looked like. So you can imagine Hansken standing in a tent like this and perform. And some of her tricks were very cleverly thought out and not clearly tricks. An Amsterdam professor, Caspar van Baarle, wrote in a letter that he had seen how the elephant caught a thief. During a performance, a woman screamed that her silver belt was stolen. Van Groeneveld promised her that his elephant would find the thief, and Hansken started sniffing around and pointed to a certain man, who of course denied. But after a second round, she pointed at the same man, who by then had the belt at his feet and had to admit his crime. And this is true, Van Baarle writes. But Michiel found out that the same incident occurred on different moments in different cities. So 4 centuries later, we now know that this was part of the performance. In many local archives in bigger and smaller European cities still are traces of Hansken's presence. And in the exhibition, we gathered a number of these documents, like the letter of Van Baarle. But apart from those, also prints like this one in which measurements and information on her age and weight are mentioned. And this is the map we have. This is the map we have in the exhibition. It gives a selection of all the 100 places where traces of Hansken are found. And the list in the exhibition, of course, ends with her death in Florence on the 9th of November, 1655, and she was only 25 years young at that time. After her death, Hansken's body remained in Florence. The Grand Duke of Tuscany, Ferdinando de' Medici, bought her skin and her skeleton, and her skeleton is still preserved at the Natural History Museum in Florence, La Specola. You can see it here in the photo. And thanks to Ferdinando de' Medici, Hansken has become an important source for science. When giant fossil bones were excavated in Italy, scientists could understand that these were not deriving from human giants, but from an older elephant species, a mammoth. Next slide, please. And the description of Hansken's skeleton by an English researcher was used by Linnaeus in the 18th century to describe the Elephas maximus. And thus, Hansken is a scientific prototype, the primal specimen of her species. And this is the reason why we wanted to show a part of a skeleton in the exhibition, and so did the management of La Specola. So Hansken's skull is now in Amsterdam, and an exact replica is in Florence until the original returns. Now, in the final section of the exhibition, the visitor is confronted with the use of animals, elephants in particular, in circuses. And we give the floor to our partners to reflect on Hansken's story and to explain how they aim at safety and well-being for these creatures. And that is, of course, IFAW, but also the Mario Hoedemakers Elephant Foundation, who focuses on the well-being of elephants in Sri Lanka, and Artis Zoo, which, as an Amsterdam institution close by the museum, also does its part in research on elephants. Plus, to get back to Rembrandt, so the circle is round, they organize drawing classes in which children and adults draw animals after life, like Rembrandt did whenever he had the chance. So to conclude this presentation, the reason to organize the exhibition at the Rembrandt House Museum is not only the fact that Rembrandt had seen and drawn Hansken, or his personal fascination for the world beyond Europe, which is another connection, but animal welfare has become an important part of the storyline within the text labels throughout the exhibition. We do not state an opinion as a museum. We give information at hand of which our visitors will think for themselves and develop an awareness. But this was possible only thanks to the collaboration and the expertise of our partners. So once again, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Leonore. Rikkert, I think Leonore gave you the perfect bridge to continue. So I give you the word. The floor, sorry, that was a Dutch translation.
Am I all muted now?
Okay.
Now I am.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry for that. Yes, similar to Leonora, we're very, very pleased with this collaboration because it's not a usual collaboration. And I think it's very important that we make those cross-pollination kind of projects like this one, so we can learn a lot from each other. And I must say that I've learned a lot from the Hansken story myself. I know a lot about elephants. I know a lot about elephant conservation, elephant welfare, but I didn't know the story of Hansken. So as soon as I heard about it, I educated myself, and it's just such an incredible story. It's a sad story. Eleonora is totally right. It's a sad story, purely from an animal welfare point of view, but it's also a mesmerizing story. And when you think about that, the first elephant, or maybe one of the first elephants, arrived in Europe, people have never even seen such a creature. They didn't have any pictures, they didn't have any footage, they didn't have any drawings at the time. There was basically nothing. And suddenly there's an elephant, this big animal, and people must have been with a trunk, and I mean, people must have been absolutely amazed by seeing it. At the same time, they didn't know how to care for it. And this all started obviously when the elephant was taken from the wild, from its family, from its group, from its mother. And we know nowadays that you cannot just take an animal away from the group. The group will protect with their lives the young animal. So probably there has been a very traumatic experience for this young elephant. Then Hansken was taken to what we now call Indonesia, what in the days was a colony of the Netherlands, to the capital, which was Batavia. And from there, it was taken on a 7-month journey all the way to the Netherlands. So here you have a young elephant alone, socially completely deprived from its family members, traumatized, on a ship, not receiving the right medical care, the veterinarian care, not receiving the right food. This must have been a lot of agony for this animal. Then it was being used across Europe to perform in somewhat circus tricks. I think the tricks were relatively harmless. What you see in circuses around the world these days is that the animals need to perform much more detrimental tricks. They need to stand on their hind legs, their forelegs, they need to sit down, which is all very, very bad for the nervous system of such a big animal. And it's only, when you talk about the Netherlands, it's only like 10 years ago that we said that we don't want these animals to perform anymore in a circus. So even we have all this knowledge about what such an animal needs from a social point of view, from a veterinarian point of view, from a skeleton point of view and everything, it's only 10 years ago that we decided in the Netherlands that this should be banned. And there are still a lot of countries in the world where circus are still allowed to perform with these animals. And we know that the transportation and all that is linked to the training and performing is not at all a good thing for the animals to experience. So I'm very pleased that in the Netherlands and some more European countries, but also in countries like Brazil and in India, I mean, these kind of circuses are not allowed anymore. I think the US still needs to do it. I think on the state level, there are bans when it comes to wild animals performing in circuses, but as far as I know, there's not a federal ban yet. So these things are still happening. And that is, to me, that is just simply amazing that we have all this knowledge and it's still happening. The people at the time of Hansken didn't have that knowledge. I am pretty sure if you see what the amount of money that they invested in the animal, I mean, the owner invested 20,000 guilders, which is an equivalent of nowadays $10,000. Now, if you bring that back to the 17th century, that was a fortune. That was a lot of money. So he clearly had the right intentions to do the right thing for the animal, but he just didn't know how. And that starts with the fact that this animal was lonely. There were human creatures around the animal, but the animal is super intelligent, is super social. And here I have the only elephant in Europe. So it must have been very lonely. And well, we know what loneliness does to people. And that must have been the same for this one elephant, for Hansken. Now, there is a whole range of things when we could talk about when we talk about, you know, what this animal must have endured. I mean, talk about the climate. The elephant literally went over the Alps and traveled in Europe in the winter. Coming from Sri Lanka, which is a tropical island, I mean, the European climate is not at all suitable for the animal. We already talked about the diet. I mean, clearly the diet from what it can find, and maybe in the summer there was grass and enough leaves, but in the summer, I mean, what did this animal eat? They gave it a lot of white bread. Now, if you give an animal only white bread that is supposed to be eating all sorts of leaves and herbs and bark and whatever it can find where it lives in a natural habitat, you create problems. So you can see that in, you know, in the pictures that Leonora just showed, the way that the belly was swollen, the way that the toenails were not taken care of. And ultimately, that was just inevitable. This animal died from an infection. What exactly the infection was, we don't know. but that this animal was going to die young and lonely and in a lot of pain was inevitable. Luckily, we know much more now from a science point of view. It still needs to be applied in legislation and in laws around the world, which is still a problem in many parts of the planet in which we live. But we're getting there, and we as IFAW are pushing that agenda. We want to educate people in what elephants are and what they need, and why they are important for the ecosystems in which they live. And as a matter of fact, we as IFAW also protect individual animals as well. We do this in Africa, where we care for rescued animals, oftentimes also babies like Hansken was. These babies are victims to poaching. That means that the family members, including the mother, have been poached for ivory. The small ones, when they're lucky, are found by community members and taken in. And we as IFAW, with our partners on the ground in Africa, we take care of them. But we don't want to keep them. Our ultimate goal will always be that we bring them back to the wild, which is a very complex undertaking. It means you need to rehabilitate it. You need to re-socialize it with other elephants. And bringing it back to the wild is a very delicate thing to do. An elephant needs to learn a lot from group members. So bringing back an elephant is something that needs to be done in stages. Sometimes it doesn't work. An elephant is too traumatized. It doesn't, so socially it doesn't fit anymore. But we will always try and keep pushing to bring these animals back to where they belong, which is in the wild. So yeah, that's our mission, that's our vision, the way that we do it now. And it has been an incredible learning experience for me as well to see how people were doing it back in the time. Right now, it would not be possible to take an elephant away from the wild because there's all sorts of legislation that prohibits this. So Sri Lanka will never allow a wild elephant to be taken and shipped to wherever in the world. But at the time, that legislation didn't exist, and people literally didn't know what they were doing. That's my assumption. So yeah, I'm pleased that we learned a lot over the centuries, that we know what these animals need, what they are, how important they are for the world that we live in. And any elephant that is in captivity, to my humble opinion and IFAW's opinion, should be returned to the wild when possible. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rikkert. I think we're going to see a video now, right? That's within the exhibition that IFAW helped to collaborate on. Can you describe what we're about to see?
Rikkert, that was a question to you.
Yeah.
Can you just, describe the video and then we'll play that's in the exhibition?
I don't see it moving.
There we go.
Yeah, there we go.
Over 20,000 African elephants are killed every year. At IFAW, we know we can protect this vulnerable species. Every day, we're finding fresh solutions to the problems facing elephants. We're working with partners on the ground, rescuing orphaned calves that wouldn't survive on their own. They've lost their mothers to poaching, human-wildlife conflict, and habitat loss. The calves are rehabilitated at orphanages through a unique scientific approach that provides the care each calf needs before it's safely released back into the wild. What we learn from each rescue helps us to better care for the next orphan. By saving individual animals, we are helping to save the species. We also know that when we release elephants back into the wild, they need a safe and secure home to thrive in. By partnering with local authorities, we are protecting key habitats and landscapes for elephant populations. This includes protecting humans as well. As elephants and communities compete for resources, humans and elephants can cross paths. We collaborate with communities bordering protected areas to keep them safe and find solutions for coexistence between humans and wildlife. And the work doesn't stop there. When ordinary approaches to stopping ivory poachers weren't working, we tried something new. We connected people across landscapes, local residents and governments, the courts and police, park rangers and intelligence officers, all to prevent poaching events before they happened. By bringing people together, we can make the biggest impact. We're helping to reduce the global demand for ivory through impactful campaigns. And our policy teams around the world are working alongside governments, indigenous people, local community groups, and with international forums
stopping wildlife crime
to create effective laws and policies that protect wild elephants. Together, we can protect elephants, restore habitats, and help animals and people thrive together. Let's get to work.
So yes, I think the video speaks for itself. We at IFAW have a very holistic view at how we work with communities within landscapes and protecting animals. I think which is in the context of the Hansken story and individual animals and welfare. This is very unique and very pioneering to our work. That is what no other conservation organizations are doing. Protecting individual animals, bringing them back to the wild, and making sure that those habitats are safe. Which means that we need to address a human-wildlife conflict, which is a serious issue, which is literally killing people and animals around the world. So that needs to be addressed. But also poaching, which is not something that people understand how difficult it can be to counter poaching. It comes with a lot of intelligence needs and a lot of operational needs, which is not always available. So it's very important that we support governments and communities in doing that vital work. So yeah, I mean, IFAW is unique in a sense that we care for the individual animal, but we definitely make sure that they fit into populations, and the populations ultimately make up a complete species. So I'm very proud that we as IFAW take that holistic view.
Okay, thanks, Rikkert. I realize, and its roots in some cultures, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Joep van Mierlo. I'm the Netherlands director. That's why I'm sitting here, introducing this wonderful exhibition in Amsterdam. But at the same time, also the European director, and heading next to the Dutch office, the offices of France, Germany, and Belgium, which did recently become an entity on its own. It was registered 6 months ago, but we only learned it now. We worked hard to get it registered, but the mail was a little bit slow. So we came now to the point where we will open up for questions. I saw there was already a first question from Brenda. Brenda, are you willing to ask the question, or shall I read it?
Oh, I can ask the question. I was just wondering back then with people then seeing this live animal, did that increase the trade of elephants back then? I know it was expensive, but did other wealthy people then want to have their own elephants? And so did that create more problems?
Shall I try to answer this question? Thank you for the question. Well, to my knowledge, not really, because it was quite an undertaking to bring such an elephant to our continent. But it had happened before. in the 16th century a couple of times, and even before Hansken in the beginning of the 17th century, there was a male Asian elephant with the name Don Diego, traveling Europe also. And then Hansken was in the middle of the 17th century the only live elephant in Europe. And in the late 17th century, there was another female Asian elephant, which was brought to Amsterdam actually. And she also had a very, incredible life story. And she ended up in England, where in Scotland, she, by a very tragic accident, she collapsed because she was from fatigue. And she was laid down by her caretaker in a sort of on the beach in a hole in the ground, and then it started to rain tremendously, and the elephant drowned. Is that the word in English? So that's another very sad story, and of course later you see that these elephants come more and more with the advanced ways of moving things from far away to Europe, bigger ships, etc., that it increases. But it was rare.
Yeah, at the same time, if I may add, at the same time, in that period, it was that we had the first poaching wave. Well, we didn't call it poaching at the time, it was hunting. There were no laws to protect these animals, so it was a free-for-all. And if we go back to historic numbers of elephants, both in Asia and Africa, we see that, you know, at the early ages when white colonial people went there were literally millions of these animals. And only 1, 2, 3 centuries later, there were only 100,000 of them. So there have been a couple of poaching waves over the time, but definitely the fact that people knew these animals were out there and they were having these majestic tusks created an appetite to buy them. And at the time it was legal, but it was as detrimental as now as current day poaching is. But definitely it opened the Pandora's box, you know, for people who wanted to have these kind of commodities from animals. It was not just elephants, it was also rhinos, it was tiger skins, it was everything that was exotic and came from afar. I mean, what we see with the numbers going down, it started at that time.
And there's also quite a lot of information on the way in which elephants on Ceylon, Sri Lanka, were hunted on by the local people. They really traded with the animals. They lived there in huge amounts, and they were captured in the most terrible ways of doing that, just digging an incredible hole in the ground and all these animals falling into it, most of them dying or breaking legs, and then those surviving and being the larger male animals were brought to India and were traded, so, or used there for labor. So there, from the country itself, there has been also a tremendous work done to capture these animals and to trade with them. And Hansken was part, as a baby elephant, of, probably she was a gift from the King of Kandy to the high-ranked people from the Dutch East India Company. And at the same time, our stadtholder had ordered for a baby elephant. And before Hansken, there was already a tiny male elephant, which died at sea because the ship which the elephant was on burned down. So, and Hansken was the next opportunity.
So just to add on, yes, they were mostly expensive gifts between rulers, but something to add is they were more common during the Roman time. They were war animals. There were attractions. So at that time they weren't known, but of course there was a a bit time between the Romans and Rembrandt, the 16th century. Okay, any more questions? I also want to say already that Martijn put the link to the English edition of the book on the chat. So if you want to look at it, please do so. And you saw my own elephant roaming the room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have a cat that always joins me late in the evening, not in the morning.
Joep, I think we have Gillian has a question.
Okay, Gillian, please.
Yes, hello. First of all, I wanted to say thank you very much to everyone who's been involved in organizing today's event. And of course, a huge thank you to IFAW for all the work that it does. My question relates to a modern day event. We've talked about the historical journey of Hansken, but today in the news, there's a lot of talk about the elephants that are on the move in China. And I think that's eliciting very different reactions. Those of us who are seeing this unfold from afar are perhaps seeing a very emotional and touching journey, whereas those who are on the ground who are being affected by this might have a very different feeling about it. People whose perhaps crops, buildings have been destroyed inadvertently by those animals on the move. What I wanted to know is, are there any concerns? You know, what does anybody have any idea of what the fate of those animals might be? You know, what awaits them at the end of this long trek? Where is the end of that trek? And is there concerns that they might be stopped in their tracks because of damage that's being caused?
That's a very good question. The ultimate aim, the ultimate goal of what in this case the Chinese government is trying to accomplish is to herd these animals back to the protected area where they came from. We all hope that that's going to work. And if they would ask IFAW to support them, we definitely will. We have an office in Yunnan, which is the province in China where this is happening. And we have a lot of experience because we have our own elephant project there. It's a very endangered population, critically endangered population, I should say. There's not a lot of elephants still roaming in that area. So it's very, very important that we make sure that this herd goes back safely to where they came from. It is a classic example. I mean, this is not just happening in Asia, this is happening in Africa, and with other species, this is happening around the world. It's a classic example of conflict between humans and animals. And it's an immense challenge that we're facing in how we mitigate this conflict. And sometimes hard barriers are needed. We don't like them. We like the idea of free roaming animals. But fact of the matter is that, you know, oftentimes we need to put up fences and hard barriers to separate people from animals. And that might need to happen in this case as well. For us as IFAW, it's critically important for going forward in our mission and our vision is that we keep creating these safe spaces, these corridors for the animals to migrate, because that's basically what's going on here. These animals are migrating. These are migrating species. They roam. They go from A to B over long distances, and they are built for that. Now we have to find the spaces where, you know, where can these animals still roam from the one protected area to the next, so they don't collide with human settlement. And that is a massive challenge that we have ahead of us, because the protected areas, both in Africa and Asia, are slowly becoming islands in an ocean of human settlements and agriculture. And for large roaming species like elephants, that is a very, very big threat. So we could talk about poaching, which is a big threat for species like elephants, but habitat loss and conflict that comes out of habitat loss is for the longer future an even bigger threat. Because if you lose the habitats, if these animals cannot roam anymore, they will simply disappear. So what the exact solution will be for this population in Yunnan needs to be seen. I mean, we would love to support them when they ask. But this is not a unique situation. We see this both in Africa and Asia in many places.
Rikkert, can I already put a question from Shulamit, who rightfully asks, why wait for the Chinese government to ask for help? Because that's
I'm pretty sure that our Chinese colleagues are already on it. I mean, because it's what we do. This is what we're good at. This is, you know, where we can support them. So I'm pretty sure that's already happening. I haven't heard it literally yet, but I will ask them later today.
But in general, we do wait or solicit the request of a government, because we don't want to be one of the rogue NGOs running around and being in the middle of something where we are not helpful. Okay. At the same time, I saw a question coming on the age. What age of the children might the book be suitable for? Martijn, I think you are the best one to answer. Martijn is on mute.
Can I ask a question, a follow-up question to the one that Brenda asked? So maybe not elephant trade, but there was a lot of trade in other animals. Rembrandt even himself had a lot of animals in his personal collection. Can you tell more about that?
Yeah, well, maybe I can first answer the question on the age of the book. I think 12 it would be safe. But it's a very nice book to read together with children also. So maybe that's an answer to that question. And then as for the other animals, yeah, that's true. In the art room of Rembrandt are mentioned a paradise bird, for example. Of course, all these animals arrived not alive in Europe. So and he also owned the skin of a lion. So this is what we also brought back in the art room to give you an idea on what Rembrandt collected. So the trade and of course incredible creatures. Gordeldier. What is the name? What is the word for gordeldier in English?
Yeah, well, yeah, you're right.
Armadillo.
Yeah.
And these blowfishes, all these creatures were in such collections. So there was quite a lot of trade on such animals. And the paradise bird, of course, is an interesting example of the myths that existed around animals just because people had never seen them alive. So thinking that these birds didn't have legs. So that's a story which is related to the practice of bringing prepared dead animals with legs taken off to another continent, and people making stories around those. So yeah, and Rembrandt made a drawing of his paradise bird also. But one other thing I think is important also to mention is we are now talking about exotic animals, but a positive thing is when I look at Rembrandt's etchings, for example, or his drawings, but also paintings like the Night Watch, search for the dogs. I think Rembrandt was a dog person. There are not many cats, but he drew and observed dogs very often. And I think if you look at those observations and how he scribbles them on the paper, it shows a certain empathy and a certain interest in what the animal is and what the animal feels or does, and how he relates himself to the people he's surrounded with. So that's something which makes Rembrandt for me a very interesting artist when it comes to animals.
was also nice I don't know if it was shown in the video, in the long video it was, but there is the picture of the lions before Rembrandt saw ever the real lions, and then the picture of him sketching the lions from a live lion, and then later on in his paintings having or in his drawings having the real lion, and the difference having a big cat or
exactly. To be convincing and to show your subject, the story you're telling in your visual artwork, to be convincing. So in that sense, it was really important to see and observe animals after life.
Okay, I'm seeing the time. I have still 2 questions, one from Rikkert. Do you know And Beyond, the conservation group?
Yeah, I heard of them. I don't know enough about them, but it's a very good question. Let me dive into it. Yeah, no, but I definitely heard from them.
Okay, and then a question for Leonore and Martijn. How is the museum doing coming out of the COVID? How long are you closed? And are guests now anxious to come back into the museum? And are they still a bit hesitant?
Martijn?
Yeah, shall I answer that one? We were closed for about 6 months from the mid of December. We're very happy that we opened again. We're on time slots, so we have a limited capacity at the moment. But the first visitor numbers of the first few days were actually pretty good. So we're happy that that our guests are back again, and we're very happy that Hansken, the exhibition, got so much attention in national newspapers, local television. So we had a really good promotion on this exhibition, and that helped increase the first visitor numbers again. So we're happy. We were probably one of the busiest museums in Amsterdam, next to the Anne Frank house. So it's a bit strange to see so few people in the museum at the same time. But hopefully at the end of this crisis, we'll go back to normal visitor numbers again, and hope to welcome visitors from all over Europe and from US. A lot of visitors normally came from the US. Hopefully we will be able to see everybody back again, and hopefully if you are able to come to Amsterdam maybe one day, then please visit our museum, and hope to see you there. Thanks.
On that note, we in this collaboration we will still have the VIP tours of about 20 major donors with a partner or an invite, where we will have a real live tour, and we will have a day where we get all the revenues from the card sale, the ticket sale, so where we will invite our mid-level and major donors to come and see. So yes, that's a great collaboration. If there are no burning questions anymore, I would like to wrap up, but I'm still willing to give a last question. If not.
I just have a couple of the things that we're talking about, exotic animals in art. And if you look at the Pietro Longhi painting of Clara, the rhinoceros, that's in Venice. And then another example of the giraffe Zarafa in the 19th century in Paris. So this sort of spectacle of the exotic animal and their plight. It's, I don't know, maybe you have a few more exhibitions and collaborations
with us
coming that you can do.
Well, I think the Rijksmuseum is, I know that Gregor Weber, who works there, is very fond of the story of Clara, and they are eager to make an exhibition on her. So that will happen as well.
Okay, so rest me to thank Leonore and Martijn, and certainly Martijn, who has been pushing and following us for 3 years, and we finally said yes. So at the right time, because you were ready also. COVID came in between, but okay, we will forget that. So thanks a lot to the Rembrandt House. Thanks to Leonora and Rikkert for the interesting conversation. And of course, thanks to all the participating members and the council members. It was a council, global council meeting. So we want to thank them especially. Thanks a lot. Within the time slot we allocated. Have a nice evening. Have a nice day. And hope to see you soon again.